I have a scar. It's on the back of this hand right here. It's about 37 years old, give or take. When I was about 13 or 14 years old, I was taught a lesson. It was a lesson that I had been told over and over and over and over again, but as a 13 or 14-year-old, I'm going to tell you a secret. Sometimes we don't learn it till it gets hard. It was a lesson that should have been pretty simple, but it wasn't. See, we used to have a speedboat. And we would go out and we would tube on it, we would ski on it and do all that. But if we fell off out in the middle of the lake and we didn't have enough time to ride back in or anything, what we would do is we would just pull the tubes in, we'd tie them off to the anchors, and then we'd just drive back in. No big deal, right? And our dad always said, be sure you tie it off. Be sure you don't ever hold it, always tie it off. Well, I, in my infinite 13, 14-year-old wisdom, figured that Dad was wrong. And so while I was pulling the boat in, I pulled it in and I wrapped it around my hand about 15, 20 times, and I pulled it all the way in, and I had the tube there, and I was braced, I was ready, and as soon as that boat took off, that tube caught the air inside the middle of that tube, and you know what it did? It proceeded to fly about 15, 20 feet up in the air, which wasn't the bad part. The bad part was for every one of those times I had it wrapped around my hand, the rope went out and pulled on my hand. And so I had this fine little burn/cut across the back of my hand where you could see my bones and my tendons doing this when I would wiggle my fingers. You know what I learned? You always tie the tubes off when you're going in. You tie it off to the boat. You don't wrap it around your hand and hold it that way. Because when you wrap it around your hand and you hold it that way, you get hurt. It was a lesson I'd already been taught many, many times. But until something important, till something serious, till something bad, till something that was more than just words happened to me, I didn't get the lesson. I just didn't pay attention. I just didn't see the need. You see, I believe God has tried for millennia to show man what love is. And He's tried to show man how He desires to take care of them. But through the hearts, though their hearts may lean toward Him occasionally, it was never truly understood in the Old Testament. And I'm going to suggest that even today, by those who don't have a true relationship with Him, Jesus' love can be hard to recognize. The truth of the matter is this: most of us are so busy telling people about salvation, telling people about the gospel. We're so busy telling them about things like redemption. We're so busy telling them about sin. We're so busy telling them about holiness that we forget the gospel isn't about knowledge. The gospel is supposed to be simple. At its heart, the gospel is about loving one another like Jesus loved us. But the truth of the matter is we can't even begin to know what love is. We can't begin to understand the gospel of love until we take a look at Jesus and see how He showed it first. We're going to look in 1 John 3, 16 through 18. Not John 3, 16. I know that's where everybody wants to flip when I'm talking about this. 1 John 3, 16 through 18. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. You see, as I read this, I realize the gospel is simple. The gospel is super simple. The gospel is simple, but it doesn't matter how many sermons you've heard or preached. The gospel is simple, but it doesn't rely on how often you've read the Bible or how often you do read the Bible. The gospel is simple if we just remember something very simple. We are not the central key of the gospel, and we like to be often. We are not the central theme in its transmission. We are not the ones who offer salvation. We are not the ones who are there dying on the cross for the guy. That was somebody else. The gospel is simple when we realize that the gospel is about reaching those who are hurting in this world. You see, the actions of Jesus that make the gospel an active and living thing, those actions are not a series of thoughts and laws. You guys get that, right? Everybody thinks the church, well, if I go to church, I'm going to have to start living a certain way. No, if you go to church, you get to start living a certain way. You don't have to, you get to. Let's make that distinction really quick. Do you know why? Because we love Jesus so much that we are not going to be abusive to our brothers and sisters. Our brothers and sisters are going to be somebody that we love, and so we are going to do our best to take care of our brothers and sisters. We get to come to church and be with our brothers and sisters. We don't have to go and put up with them. We get to come and learn about Jesus. We don't have to obligatorily go through the Bible and learn every single detail. Let's be clear about this. It's not about having to go to church. It's about getting to. It's not about having to have a relationship with Jesus. It's about getting to have a relationship with Him. And it's not about thoughts and laws that are somehow going to be law-changing. I hate to break it to you, but thoughts and laws don't change lives. As a matter of fact, if you look in Romans, Paul talks about the fact that all the law does is it points sin out and is more restrictive than it is freeing. The truth of the matter is, the gospel is an active and moving response to the love that Jesus had for us. The gospel isn't a bunch of words, it's our actions. Looking at this, I feel a tug that tells me the action of Jesus sacrificing for me means it's time for me to take action and to sacrifice for others. See, the truth of the matter is we've seen what love is through Jesus. Now it's time for us to share the gospel in action. Look at John 13, 12 through 17. It says, "When we had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. 'Do you understand what I have done for you?' he asked them. 'You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them.'" The example has been set. The question is, do we follow it? Jesus was our master. He taught many things. Jesus taught humility, he taught servitude, he taught compassion, he taught boldness. But in these things, every single one of those things where he does this lesson, he exemplified love. Jesus never did one thing that didn't have love tied into it. And he didn't ever do one thing that had love tied into it that it wasn't the dominant feature of life in his world. It was a defining factor for him. And even though we didn't get it while he was still here with us, he showed love so pure that we shouldn't be able to miss it. Which is why I'm amazed sometimes the world can't get that we have love to offer. You get that, right? Do you hear me? We are a very confusing place for the world. We are confusing because we talk about love, we talk about Jesus that's love, we talk about all this all the time. We talk about having a master that loves us so much that he wants to do all these things for us. The problem is this, is when you start hearing about the things going on in the media right now, it doesn't look like we're love at all. It looks like we're just a bunch of bigots. Maybe you haven't watched the same media that I have. So we're confusing through the world. But it would sure help if we could at least love each other here and change that perspective. I know Jesus didn't always sound like he was speaking lovingly to people. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, it didn't always sound like he was, but I know that the words he spoke were loving. I don't think the example that he gave to his disciples would be the same if he hadn't gotten down on his knees and washed their feet. He kept telling them, "I love you." He kept telling them, "I love you." And their feet were dirty and scratchy because nobody had come in and washed their feet yet. "I love you, I love you, I love you." And their feet are dirty and scratchy. They got grains between the toes. You know what I'm talking about? You ever been out on the beach and you got that wet sand in your feet and it kind of just sits there and it rubs between your toes and you're like, I got to fix it. And you want to go down to the ocean, you try to wash it off in the ocean, but you get just enough back in there that you can't even hardly tell except for the fact that that one grain is grating in that one spot. You with me? Jesus is at the Last Supper telling the apostles, I love you, I love you, I love you. Here's what's going to happen. And they're all going, my toes are going crazy. And Jesus, the master of the meal, who has been trying to speak lovingly to them for a long time, who's been trying to speak love into their lives for so long, looks up and goes, here's how much I love you. Your nasty feet and I are about to have an encounter. I am going to tell you something. My wife doesn't want to wash my feet. I wear shoes and she doesn't want to wash my feet. Gary, I love you, but I know how often you wear flip-flops. I don't want to wash your feet. The master of the feast looks at his disciples and goes, I know you guys keep thinking I'm talking about love, but I know you don't get it. Here, let me explain it to you. As nasty as your feet are, I'm going to take a bowl, I'm going to take my shirt off down, I'm going to take the bowl and the rag and the water, and I'm going to kneel before you. And I'm going to grab your feet, and I'm going to touch them, and I'm going to wash them until they're clean. And I'm going to dry them so that you know what love really is. Jesus, before he even went to the cross, put the gospel in action by loving his people enough to show them the gospel is active. It is not just a bunch of words. Because the truth of the matter is this, it doesn't matter how many times you tell someone that Jesus loves them. It doesn't matter how many times you tell them you love them. Until you're willing to put it all on the line, it doesn't come across as love. It comes across as words. I don't think it's a mistake that John goes after us where it hurts in his letter. He goes after our money. Did you see it? Or have you already, just checking. Did you see it or have you already blanked out? Just checking. Because the truth of the matter is, I want to blank out when I read it. 1 John 3:17, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Surely he doesn't mean we should give our stuff away. We worked dang hard for that stuff, didn't we? We're Americans. We like our stuff. Not only do we get stuff to fill our houses, we go rent storage units so we can get more stuff and put more stuff in more places. And then if we don't fill that one storage unit, you know what you do? Somebody builds a bigger one. And if you fill 2 storage units, well, that is a call to build a barn on your property. Because obviously you need a bigger spot to store more stuff. Welcome to America. I know that sounds crazy, and I know I'm being kind of silly about it, but the truth of the matter is, we like our stuff. And we don't want stuff that's junky, we want stuff that's nice. We work overtime to buy stuff to impress people that we want to try and prove we aren't trying to impress. Did you get it? We like our stuff, and right there, if anyone has a material possession and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? I want you to know something. He does mean we should give away our stuff. If you look in Acts 2:44, it says all the believers were together and had everything in common. Here's my favorite. I've had a lot of people go, well, surely that doesn't mean give away their possessions. They had everything in common in faith. They had everything in common in the background. They had everything in common, blah, 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 blah. All that would be plausible, maybe even possible, if the next sentence in the verse didn't exist. Acts 2:45 says, they sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. How crazy would it be if we had everybody in here who has a storage unit? If you have a storage unit, I'm not going after your storage unit. I want you to know that. But if everybody who had a storage unit in here went, okay, everything that's stored in my barn or in my storage unit, we're going to sell it and give it to the church so we can go out and give it to other people that need stuff. I'm telling you right now, I am not getting a lot of smiles back. I'm getting a lot of people leaning over their spouse going, is he serious this time? Just like that right there. I'm just telling you, it's funny to me because I'm sitting here reading to you from the Bible, Acts 2:45, where it says they sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. And the funny thing to me is we're all going, is he serious? I'm not serious. The Bible is. It seems pretty on point to me. And there are some people that go, well, they did that at the beginning, but maybe not later. Well, in Acts 4:32 through 35, it says, all the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. I want you to know, I like this part. I think it's really groovy and everything, but it sounds a lot to me like all those people. Or there's a bunch of people. As a preacher, I cannot tell you the number of people that there must be thousands of people in the congregations that I have preached in. Because I invariably have people walk up to me and go, well, there's a bunch of people that aren't happy about this. There's a bunch of people that think we need to do this. There's a bunch of people, and when I look at them and go, how many people? Well, there's a bunch. But how many are we really talking about? Well, there's several. Really, how many? Well, I think we should do that. I wish that were not true. I wish that were not made up. I wish that were not true. I wish that were not a conversation that I hadn't had 50 or 60 times. And I don't like anybody looking at this section of Acts and going, well, maybe it's just one of those, there's a lot of people. When you do that, it's easy to create a false sense of secure, a false sense of turmoil, a false sense of outrage or concern. But Luke is led to wisdom as he completes the story with an example of one who was actually doing it. Because if you look at 36 and 37 of that same chapter, we see Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, sold a field he owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. I want you to be excited about that. Barnabas was living out the gospel. Barnabas was living out the gospel in action. Barnabas was not explaining to people how sin is the downfall of man in the garden, and when you come to Jesus, that sin is washed away, and then we need to go and baptize you. Now, I know John the Baptist people over there say this, and I know Jesus people say this, and I know there's even a sect over here that says this, and Paul says this, and Apollos says this. Or maybe it sounds more like this. The Baptists say this, and the Episcopalians say this, and the Presbyterians say this, but the independent Christians say, oh wait, no, that's today's deal, isn't it? Sorry, I jumped. See, we get so wound up in the thought of it that we get off track from what we're supposed to be doing. And Barnabas stayed on track and saw that the gospel needed to push forward. And so what did he do? He sold a field he owned. He brought the money and he put it at the apostles' feet. Do you know why? Not so that he could be held up and shouted aloud, but so that people would know the gospel of Jesus Christ as an active entity. It's hard for us to understand sitting here. Is anybody in here just freezing cold? Freezing cold, like you're going to die tomorrow if you're freezing cold, Kathy. Anybody in here just burning hot? We live in a nice little lukewarm place. You ever notice that? It's always interesting to me when I take groups out, though, to do things that aren't normal for us. Because I've been with groups that have taken supplies to homeless or those that choose to live outside. And as I watched one very well-meaning young man speak to a fella, he had a hard time. Because the fellow he was talking to looked an awful lot like that. He was huddled up in his blankets. He was in a ball. You could barely see just his eyes, his nose, and maybe a little bit of his mouth. He was pushed up underneath an underpass trying to get out of the wind. This kid had walked up there, and he was sitting with them, and he was talking to them, and he told them about Jesus. He told them that Jesus loved him so much that it would blow his mind if he would accept Jesus. He told him that there was redemption through Jesus, that the sin that he had committed in the world could be washed away by the blood of Jesus. That kid, he did a great job expressing the gospel message. There's only one problem that he had. It was November. It was fixing to be December. The man was huddled up underneath that bridge because he was freezing. He wasn't freezing like he was cold in church. He was freezing like he was going to lose feet. And when the kid said that all he had to do was accept Jesus to be saved, the man looked at the boy and asked a very simple question. If I accept Jesus tonight, will he keep me warm? If I accept Jesus tonight, will you keep me warm? Can you keep me from freezing? I watched that young man walk away dejected. I could see the frustration on his face because we do such a great job of teaching John 3:16 as the gospel. When we offer it to somebody, we're shocked when they don't want to take it. And that was the look on his face. Don't get me wrong. John 3:16, it is the perfect explanation of what we should drive our actions in the simple gospel. It is the perfect explanation of how the gospel works here. But unless we tie it to 1 John 3:16 through 18 here, we're missing something. We're all brain and no heart. We need to teach John 3:16 in tandem with 1 John 3:18, where it says, "Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth." If we taught through actions and living in our lives that way, we would have the opportunity to pass that not only on to those who need the simple gospel, not only the ones that need it in the world, but if we live it out, we may be able to pass the simple gospel on in our houses. The truth of the matter is, if you're not sure how to put the gospel into action, I'm going to give you an opportunity, and we're going to give you an opportunity through January. I forgot to bring it today. But I've got a coat. It's not a fancy coat. It's the one I used when I go out and worked in the hay fields and in the barn sometimes. It's still in really good shape. I like it. It's comfortable. It's one of about 8 I probably own. I haven't worn it in 2 years. But by gummies, it's my coat. I need to put the gospel into action. And since I have heard far too many stories like the one above, where there are people basically freezing and we're watching them do it, I'm going to throw a suggestion out to you that I'm going to do with my coat. And I'm going to invite you to join me. If you have at least 4 or 5 coats in your closet, if you have some that you wear once or twice a year, if you have some that you've never worn, if they aren't just torn to pieces, bring them here, and we're going to have a box out there where you can put coats in. Those coats are going to go to the mission. Because I'm going to tell you a secret. Most of us don't know how to approach somebody who needs a coat like that. I know it's not hard, but most of us don't know how. The mission does. The mission is also a point of contact for most of the people that we know around here that are homeless or are living outside. And so what I want to do is I want to create a box out here that we can bring coats in and we can put them in there because the mission has said they need coats. Because it's starting to get cold, folks. And if we have something that somebody needs, what are we supposed to do with it? Give it to the person in need. Isn't that what John tells us? Isn't that how we can easily show an active gospel that is simple? So I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to bring my coat. I'm going to check and see if I've got more, because I'm sure I do. I'm going to bring my coat. I'm going to put it in the box. It's not up yet. I wanted to talk to you guys about it first. But I'm going to bring my coat and I'm going to put it in the box. When I get the box there, I'm going to put it in there, and you guys are welcome to bring your coats and put them in there too. And on Wednesdays, when we take stuff to the mission for our Shepherd's Challenge, we'll take the coats. Here's what I want to do. I want to get 50 coats. There's like 70-ish people sitting in here right now. So if you go home and you look and you've got 2 coats you don't wear and you bring it back here, we got 50 easy. I'm not joking about this, because I don't think there's anything funny about people freezing to death while we sit in our comfortable church and don't even notice that it's cold. When we can do something so simple and take the gospel to them. I think it's amazing when the gospel gets put in action. And I'm really excited about the prospect of us being the ones that do it. The gospel isn't meant to be complicated. It isn't meant to be hard. It isn't meant to be so far out of the theological membrane that you can't pull it back in and understand what it is. The gospel is simple. Jesus loved us, and we need to show his love to others. If you can get on board with that, I encourage you to go home and check your closet. Now, I'm not just taking used coats. If you go home and you've got 1 coat in there, but you can afford to buy another coat, go buy a coat and bring it in. We're okay with that. But we are, as a church, going to try and show the love of Jesus to Ponca City. We're going to try and show them a gospel that is in action. We're going to try and show them a gospel that is working and is about love. Because 1 John 3:16-18 says, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth." Jesus came. He died on a cross to fix what we broke. He bought us. I didn't say brought us. I said he bought us back from Satan and death with his own suffering and with his own death. He is so powerful that he walked out of hell on his own. Nobody had to go get him. Nobody had to save him. Nobody had to pay for him. Jesus walked out of hell all by himself. He returned to this earth, and he let a bunch of people know that everyone thought when he was dead, he's alive again. Here's the cool part. Jesus died once, and he's still alive today. Jesus died once, and then he left us to go prepare a place for us to be with him and God for the rest of time. And do you know why Jesus died once and he did all those things for us? It's very simple. Jesus did all that because he loves us so much. And he wanted to show us through action. He did all of that because of love. So my question now is this, and it's very simple. What will you do to show Jesus' love to Ponca City? What will you do to show the love of Jesus to the world? Personally, corporately, in the church, outside the church, what will you do to take the simple gospel out into the world and to show them what Jesus is all about? Are you ready? Let's take the simple gospel and show them who Jesus is.